This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.
Welcome to the Lake Superior Podcast. I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara. We are made stronger by story, and there's no better source than the continent's largest body of fresh water, Lake Superior.
So join us as we highlight the 5 national parks that ring this greatest of the Great Lakes, meet the people, tour the places, and learn about the projects that make these parks and body of water so remarkable.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara.
Welcome once again to the Lake Superior Podcast. Today, Frida, I'm going to defer to you a lot on this because this is something that you have experience with that I really don't, which is kayaking, especially on the Apostle Islands and on Lake Superior. But we're going to talk with someone that knows it pretty well, Aidan Lee, and tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I've been watching that lake, and when it's glassy, oh my gosh, I can get sassy, I guess. Get out there and start, go for a good paddle, and somebody's going to have fun with me saying that. But we really have 2,800 miles of shoreline on Lake Superior to explore. It is some of the most magical water you could ever find. It's clean, it's clear. But I also like to say Lake Superior is the boss, and you don't want to go out there without somebody along with you, and a good person to have along is Aidan Lee.
Aidan Lee joins us here on the podcast. He is owner of Trek and Trail Sea Kayaking out of Bayfield, Wisconsin. Welcome to the podcast, Aidan.
Yeah, thanks, Walt and Frida. That's a flattering introduction.
Well, we wanted to talk to you about kayaking, not just kayaking on the big lake, but perhaps a little bit more specifically of the Apostle Islands area. But just as a little bit of a background to get you introduced to our listeners, tell us about Aidan Lee. What led you to become a kayaker?
Yeah, for me, it's kind of a full circle story that, starts and ends, well, I should say, continues with Trek and Trail. I got my start as a guide with Trek and Trail in 2016. I was a student at the University of Minnesota and got a summer job as a kayak guide up here. I really had very limited paddling experience, was kind of new to the outdoor industry, and Trek and Trail was willing to bring me on board. And after spending some time through their pretty rigorous training program, you come out the other side as ready to start guiding. And so I'm definitely grateful to Trek and Trail, the previous owners, and for all of the knowledge they shared that got me started here.
So it sounds like you have a real sort of affinity for kayaking. Can you kind of describe that for someone that maybe has never done it, or at least what is the appeal for getting out on the water for you? Well,
you kind of mentioned it. I mean, anyone listening to this podcast probably has a sense that the lake is a really meaningful body of water for many of us. It really kind of gets into you. And so sea kayaking for me has always been the best way to connect with Lake Superior and just water in general. But yeah, you're sitting inches above the surface of the water, flat water, dynamic waters, that sort of thing. It's an ever-changing environment, and kayak's just a really graceful way to navigate it.
Let me ask you one quick question here. You're referring to sea kayaking. We've used that term here now a little bit, but we hear Lake Superior, but you're talking sea kayaking. Now, for those of us that are familiar with the lake, we know we have basically an inland sea there, but explain what that is, because this isn't just sort of getting in the kayak on a small inland lake. This has got some extra preparation and stuff too, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely. In the Midwest here, Minnesota being the land of 10,000 lakes, and Wisconsin, most people who come kayaking with us have done some sort of recreational kayaking on their local, inland lakes. And Lake Superior is the largest lake in the world by surface area, and the waves we see, regularly can reach heights of 3 feet easily. And for reference, those are when you're sitting in your kayak, waves that are at or above your head. So your buddies next to you would be disappearing behind the waves you're paddling in. And so when, most people who have done recreational kayaking, it's probably an experience they've not had on their local lake.
It is really something when you get that opportunity to be out there on that big water. And you bet you're always looking over your shoulder to make sure that, Lake Superior's the boss, make sure that we are prepared for whatever the weather's bringing our way. But Aidan, I mean, you don't have to tell me twice, that's for sure, because it is so remarkable to visit there. But let's just let the world know a little bit about why the Apostles are such a paradise for paddlers.
It's a big box to open, but I'll take a stab at it. The Apostle Islands are just, they're remarkable. They're remote. There's 21 islands, and they all kind of have their own character. A lot of historical importance with the Apostle Islands. From the Anishinaabe people who use the islands, who traveled amongst them for their purposes, to more contemporary history. The islands have been home to many people, over, many, many hundreds of years. And so to be sort of part of that now is a humbling experience. Sort of find yourself in that tapestry of that sort of history and culture is it's humbling for me. There's beaches, cliffs, diverse forests, ecosystems that you can't really find anywhere else. It's just kind of all comes together here in the islands. And I don't know. I've always kind of described it as, I've paddled in Alaska and some really remarkable places, and have found myself thinking about the Apostle Islands and Lake Superior, when I'm sitting in front of tidewater glaciers. And it's kind of this sort of a subtle beauty is the way I've described it before. It kind of sneaks up on you. It doesn't, it's not this obvious splendor of like mountains and glaciers. It's a softer beauty, the sunsets and the way it all sort of weaves together. To me, it just kind of gets into your soul.
Would you say that the Apostles are a place for a beginning paddler to explore?
That's kind of a hard one, because, we want to make hiking accessible for as many people as possible. And I think your experience is sort of secondary to your perception and assessment of risk and your own self-assessment of your abilities. Because Lake Superior has many moods, and there are days when you don't want to put your boat in the water. And there are other days where, it's like glass and can be really deceptive that way. And so there are days when, the right person with the right amount of humility and the right amount of knowledge about what the weather forecast is supposed to do, can go out there and have a really nice time, with maybe not like the super in-depth, paddling, sea kayaking proficiency. But, what I want to sort of emphasize is that you have to have some knowledge of the weather patterns and be able to understand, that just because the water's calm here doesn't mean that when you get around that point, it's going to be that way. There is a baseline of knowledge that you'd want to have under your belt. And then from there you can decide, well, what are my sea kayaking skills like? Am I comfortable paddling in what's forecasted for today? Or do I, want to sit this one out and maybe, drink tea on the beach for the day?
When you mention that, Aidan, I have paddled Lake Superior for, I think now 35 years at least, I guess. But I do want to say that paddling at the Apostles does present weather that I'm not necessarily used to on Lake Superior. Why is that? Why is there this really unique weather pattern?
Yeah, I mean, the lake is a big enough body of water that it does sort of create its own local weather. And so we'll see fog rolling in. We'll see localized squalls that will really just pop up out of nowhere, and these are like really small, intense storms that like they will show up as a blip on the radar. It's kind of amazing. They'll come up out of nowhere, and it's sometimes just like, sometimes they pop up right over you, and hopefully they don't. But there's a level of, it's like when scattered thunderstorms are in the forecast, there's a level of uncertainty with that. You just kind of have to stay on your toes and keep in mind, like, where's my nearest landing spot from here, if things really do go sideways.
We're talking with Aidan Lee on the podcast today, owner of Trek and Trail in Bayfield, Wisconsin, talking about kayaking the Apostle Islands on Lake Superior. And let's talk about it a little bit, Aidan, in terms of the gear that you need to be out on Superior. What are some of the things that need to be not missed?
Sure. Well, I'd like to just say, some folks might not know the difference between sort of a sea kayak and a recreational kayak. Sea kayaks are generally 16 feet or longer. And they have bulkheads, which are walls that compartmentalize your kayak. And so the benefit there is if your, cockpit or a hatch started to fill up with water, your entire kayak's not going to fill with water. There'll be some air trapped in there, so it's not going to sink to the bottom. And so that's a pretty key safety feature, and why recreational kayaks are pretty discouraged on Lake Superior, are those bulkheads. So that's a big one, is kayak choice. What people most associate with Lake Superior is its cold waters. And so dressing appropriately, even when we have hot summer days, right, you might still want to be wearing a full wetsuit, and in the off, like the shoulder seasons, the people who are brave enough to go paddle in April, May, and October, November, you're going to see them in dry suits. But in the summer, having a wetsuit so that if you do end up in the water, you're going to extend the time that you can spend getting back into it, because hypothermia otherwise sets in pretty quickly. Obviously, a properly fitting life jacket, PFD, is necessary. Some other safety equipment that folks are probably less familiar with. We have bilge pumps, obviously, to shoot water out of your kayak if it were to fill up after getting back in. And then a paddle float, too, is a tool you use to help get yourself back in if you don't have a partner to help stabilize your kayak to get back in. So paddle float is a great tool. Paddling with a buddy should be on your checklist of things to bring kayaking. Paddling by yourself is kind of inadvisable around here.
Absolutely. And the other thing about a spray skirt, many times people in their recreational kayaks, they don't even, they want to tan their thighs.
Yeah,
well, that's not going to happen. You can really see a kayaker very closely when you're walking on the beach, because they're the one that, they still have whale white legs because they've, been in that, the spray skirt there. If we were going to extend not just a day paddle, but we were going to go for an overnight, which to me, that's what the Apostles is just, the lure to say, let's go and make a loop around 3 or 4, or, even I think you could spend a month and still not see everything. How do you change your gear when you're making those kinds of trips?
Well, obviously, you're bringing camping gear, so you've got your stuff to sort of spend the night. And so, you're going to have just the kind of things that you're going to need to sort of live out in the elements for an extended period of time. Having a nice tent that, the common theme is going to be bugs, right? So having a tent with mesh inner is going to be helpful. A head net is a really nice thing to throw in your kit. Long clothing, keep the sun off and bugs off. I have footwear, it's like I've got my paddling neoprene booties, and then I also have shoes that I can change into for camp. And then also the islands have hiking trails on them. And so having like a pair of tennis shoes or hiking boots that you can, use to explore the islands on foot and get into the interior too, there's a lot you don't want to miss.
Aidan, what I'm hearing here is obviously there's a lot of the gear that you have to plan for an overnight stay, like if you were going on a camping trip or a backpacking trip. But obviously now you add the factor of a kayak and all of the stuff that comes with that. How is the kayak camping trip different from a backpacking trip? And then another question that ties into that is, like, how do you know you're ready? Because it sounds like there's a lot of responsibility, a lot of gear, and it could take a lot of your time. What are some of the differences there, and how do you know if you're ready?
Well, I guess I would say that I started out, backpacking. That was like my first outdoor sort of pursuit, and then once I realized you could put all the stuff in a boat and float it around instead of carrying it on your shoulders, it's kind of hard to go back to backpacking. Kayaks, you're not carrying that weight around. Your boat just kind of swallows it, and you can fit a lot of stuff in a sea kayak. Probably, I would say depending on the kayak, 1.5 to 2 backpacks worth of stuff if you pack creatively. And so kayak campers are, from like, we're not the ultralight backpackers, through hiking, the Appalachian Trail. We're usually living a little larger than that. You can bring, some fresh foods and, maybe a nice stove, 2-burner stove even. I definitely tend to pack a little heavier when I'm sea kayaking because you can. You also, right, as you mentioned, you've got to pack some additional safety equipment as it pertains to water travel. And so, I've got like my repair kit for my kayak if things are going to break. You're bringing flares, you've got a radio, you've got extra stuff that, from a like in a nautical environment, you just got to think about that. So yeah, there is a lot to bring. There's a lot to keep in mind. There's a lot of knowledge you need to have, right? Just not the general, just camping knowledge, but how to navigate and, the risk assessment, making weather calls, weather decisions in the field in real time, all that stuff. And knowing when you're ready, I think, if you have the opportunity to paddle with other people who have spent time here, that's definitely gonna be helpful. You're gonna learn a lot, and people up here are really, really happy to share that kind of information. The other thing that's just kind of more technical is like, you should ask yourself, like, if I were gonna flip over in my kayak, what is my ability to get back into this thing?
Right.
And, in what range of conditions am I comfortable doing that? And if you're in conditions and you ask yourself, like, could I get myself back into my kayak, or could I get my buddy back into their kayak if they fell out? And the answer is no. That's you might want to take a hard look in the mirror and reassess.
Yeah, that makes good sense. Now, again, we're talking with Aidan Lee here on the podcast today, owner of Trek and Trail in Bayfield, Wisconsin, talking about the Apostle Islands, doing some kayaking there. You've alluded to this. We kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, and veteran paddlers do know this. Lake Superior is truly the boss when it comes to this. You can try to plan as best as you can, but growing up on the lakes here, myself even, I know that one moment it's one thing, the other moment it's next. How do you get the point across to newcomers that might be very eager, but maybe they're not terribly experienced to understand that?
I think we've seen sort of over time, I think people are, they're hearing stories, there's been some real tragedies, and there always have been, but like the coverage, is kind of spread far and wide. And I think, that sentiment is kind of spreading. It's like Lake Superior is not to be taken for granted. And so I think, we're finding that more people are coming with some humility than they have in the past. But, like hearing some of the stories that have come out, in recent years, I think like some of them are really pretty heavy, and, that those sorts of, personal, the details of those incidents and what went wrong, and, how we're sort of addressing and setting people up to not make similar mistakes. I think people usually kind of get the point that way, and also doesn't take a lot of time around Lake Superior to see it get the way it can get. Mm-hmm. And so, even if you're in town for a few days, chances are you're going to see it pick up at some point, and it doesn't take much for it to show its colors.
I think what you're sharing is so important, Aidan. I had an old gent tell me when I started first kayaking, and he was, I don't know. I mean, he was older than dirt for sure. He was probably the same age as I am now. But anyway, he was sharing with me. He said, if you can get in and out of a bathtub, you can kayak. And I love that about it. And so making it accessible and getting folks out there, because once you bring them out on the water and they get to feel that, you're, like you said, your butt's just 4 inches under the water line. You are really feeling what the lake is doing. But then when you pair, you've got that, will to say, let's go and do an overnight. And with Trek and Trail, you guys offer multiple day trips. The best is to go with someone, a veteran, your guides, and they know what to look out for. How many times I remember as a young kayaker taking off from the beach and having my guide look over at me and saying, Frida, you put your toggle on your spray skirt, you tucked it in. You can't, you don't have your grab loop. That was like the most simple thing, but whoa, thank you. And just having eyes, on all areas, not only the weather, but just each other. And noting when somebody, have you eaten today? Did you drink any water? How'd you sleep last night? Because every mile, I know we kind of look at, it's 1,000 paddle strokes for every mile. And a backpacker might be able to say, I can hike 4 miles, but paddling 4 miles between islands at the Apostles, it's a whole other ball game. I mean, it's so much easier because I am never going to backpack. I can say that right now. No, don't make me do that. I am always going to float my load because I take way too many lemons, and I have not taken ice. I got to tell you, I haven't taken ice. Sometimes we found it,
right?
So, here's the thing: when Frida's talking about this kind of thing, and I'm a novice. I mean, I've been out on kayaks on the small inland lakes. I know what it's like, and I grew up with boats and all of that. But when you get out there, what I'm hearing, and Frida's mentioned this with other podcasts we've done, I'm hearing it in your voice, that there is something of being out there. It's quieter. It's more, you're there with somebody, maybe a group, but you're in a sort of a different mental space being out there. Do you have a favorite island in the Apostles or camping spot that you like to go to really have that experience?
Definitely. We spend a lot of time in the inner islands, on our guided tours because, it's most accessible routes, and there's, it's just really easier to get to. And the further out you get, the more sort of at hand that feeling gets to be of being out there. Obviously, it's a pretty direct relationship further from the mainland, the more remote you feel. And so I found that sort of raw feeling out on outer island. That sand spit out there has always inspired me. It's like about a mile long sand spit that comes off the south tip, and so you can walk to the very tip of it, and you're watching waves crash from 2 separate directions on that sand spit. Feel like you're on another planet, and so that's a personal favorite of mine. Also, just the feeling of it's pretty hard to get further out there than outer, and so that's one. And then campsite wise. I think I'm not going to get in trouble for saying this because I think the secret's kind of out about this particular spot. I've seen people booking this island more often, but Ironwood 1 has just the most amazing remote feeling to it. It's kind of an unassuming island, and it's pretty far out there. It's definitely not easy to get to, but there's no dock, so the only access is via kayak. There's no trail on the island, so it's really just this really amazing sand spit beach. The site's right on the beach there, and so you just kind of when you're there, you've got the whole island to yourself because there's nowhere else to land. So that's, to me, like peak wildness is on Ironwood there.
I have to add to Walt, I got to take you there.
Oh, geez, here we go.
The west side of Devil's Island and the sea caves there. Now, before you go, though, you have got to put a pinch of tobacco for Mr. Pishu in the lake before you go, just to make sure that tail stays lowered, because don't ever, ever, ever think about exploring those sea caves if there's any kind of chop out there.
No, and that really drives that home, too. Is I'm hearing a lot of experience. Aidan, in terms of what you guys do at Trek and Trail, I mean, if people want to maybe find out a little bit more about the shop, maybe they want to talk to you directly after they hear you, they got some questions, what's a good way to find out more about what you guys do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they can give us a call. They can also find us online at trek-trail.com. You're going to get me these days in the off season. It's, I'm the one answering the emails and answering the phones. So that's going to be the best way to get in touch.
Yeah. And Aidan, if someone comes and they don't have any gear, but they're really ready to, dive into the sport, you've got it all if they wanted to do a trip, right?
Right. Yeah. In addition to being an outfitter, we are also a paddling retail shop. And so we have a lot in stock. And if we don't have it, we can also get it for you, too. So, just give us a call, stop in. We'll see what we can do.
And Aidan, what about training? Before you take anyone on a long trip, do they get training through you?
Yeah. So we do provide some instruction at the beginning of all of our tours, day tours. It's about a 30-minute paddling tutorial where we talk through paddling strokes and that kind of stuff. We do have on our overnight trips, people demonstrate a successful wet exit. So you're going to have to go out there with your guide and tip that boat over and show that you can release your spray skirt and exit the kayak underwater. The most anxiety-inducing part of people's trips generally. That's why we do it right at the beginning and get it out of the way. Mm-hmm. And, it's a good thing for our guides to see. We want to make sure that you sort of have the upper body strength to do that, because obviously that's not a place you want to hang out, is under your kayak underwater.
Right. Hallelujah. Hallelujah for doing that, Aidan, because you're right. I mean, I've seen my own girlfriends just panic with the thought that they're going to have to go underwater, but we dive in all the time. So, it really is. Right. Once you do it, you come back up and everybody's got that smile on their face. And you're like, yeah, you're good to go. So it makes a difference.
Yeah, you're going to get wet. You're going kayaking. You're going to get wet. So, as we wrap up with you here, Aidan, and
I got a question.
Frida's got a question.
I do.
Here we go.
Because I'm like itching right here. Walt, I got a plan.
You should see your face right now.
Yeah, I'm ready to go. I'm going to go home and say to Ron, where's the tent? Let's air it out. But when you're traveling and you're heading out on a trip, is there something that is not on a gear list, but it's on Aidan's list to make sure it's going to be a good kayak trip?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think for me, the sort of luxury item that my fiance and I don't leave home without is our travel cribbage board. We're always finding time, in the tent or on the beach when we get where we're going, to squeeze in a game of cribbage and keep the rivalry alive.
I love it. 15-2, 15-4.
Yeah, exactly.
Aidan, that makes sense, because one thing for people to keep in mind, if they are going to do this and they are going to explore this, and you're going to go somewhere out to like the Apostle Islands or some of these other places along Lake Superior, you're not going to have your internet, and you're not going to have chargers, and you're not going to, this is really getting out there, and bringing something as classic as just a cribbage board or something, a couple of decks of waterproof cards is not a bad idea at all.
Walt, you need to bring a harmonica.
A harmonica.
That would be good. Yeah.
Nice.
So,
around the campfire.
You want to do that. So, again, your website for the shop there for people to check out is?
Yeah, trek-trail.com. Mm-hmm. Phone number is 715-779-3595.
Okay. Well, you're in Bayfield, Wisconsin, right along the way there along Lake Superior shoreline. And we certainly appreciate your update today, Aidan, with this, because, there's a lot of folks to check out the podcast. They're curious about Lake Superior. They never had any of these experiences. And I think you took them on the journey very well today, Aidan. Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
That's Aidan Lee, who is owner of Trek and Trail in Bayfield, Wisconsin, sharing some of his expertise on outdoor kayaking, sea kayaking, I should say, and just making sure that people understand what it's about. The message, when we talk to so many people, Frida, in this podcast is, of course, respect the big lake, but enjoy the big lake.
Oh, there's so much. The beauty. We've talked so much with folks that understand why we get to the water, why we need water in our life. And there's no better way to really immerse yourself in that. And the beauty of the apostles is that when you look at those 21 islands and look at the campsites, and certainly the National Park Service is who you're going to be booking your camping with. And Aidan and the folks at Trek and Trail can also help you with that. Just gauging, so how many days do you have that you can be out there?
Right.
What's your skill level,
And always a great way to get into this is by going through any of the national parks of Lake Superior, and the foundation is here to help get the word out about it. And if you're poking around the website after you found the podcast here or something like that, and you've got some ideas, you've got some suggestions, you can get them to Frida, and I will be happy to talk to you about some of these ideas, maybe tell you a little bit more about some of the guests that we've talked to, but we certainly would like to hear from you through the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation website. So it's going to do it for another episode of this, our podcast here, the Lake Superior Podcast. I'm Walt Lindala.
I'm Frida Waara. Thanks for listening. The National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, NPLSF, is the only official nonprofit 501c3 fundraising partner of the National Park Service for all 5 U.S. national park sites on Lake Superior.
To learn more about NPLSF projects and programs, you can visit the website at nplsf.org or friend them on Facebook.
I'm Frida Waara.
And I'm Walt Lindala. Thanks for listening to the Lake Superior Podcast.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.